World War II. He was a prisoner of war, and there was unimaginable suffering. For those of you who are a little squeamish, excuse the next couple of minutes, but it's an important part of the story. His legs had been injured, and so gangrene was setting in, and he was suffering a lot. But the thing that he suffered the most from was the guard that came at night, when there wasn't anybody else around. And he loved particularly to torture him. He would put maggots on his feet and his legs, and then he would force feed him raw chicken entrails. And when he was finally released, it was this guard that he had the most hatred for. This was the guard that he suffered the most from. And a few years later, he testified about the atrocities at the Nuremberg trials. And so he spoke about what the guard had done when the man was put on trial. And then he wrote, "After I finished testifying, another man in the courtroom was granted permission to address the court. He said that while he did not intend to defend the officer who was on trial, he felt that the court should consider the possibility that the officer had acted to save my life, perhaps even at some peril of his own. The man explained that the maggots the officer had placed on my legs ate the dead flesh, allowing new flesh to grow. And that in my weakened condition, one of the few things I could have assimilated and derived nourishment from was raw chicken entrails. The officer had probably saved my life." The impact of those words was shattering. I broke down, excuse me, I broke down in tears as I released the bitterness of years that I had harbored toward this officer. And I made a silent oath to myself never again to hate or condemn another person. Today, my own philosophy does not allow me to consider the concept of separate souls. Because of my experience, I have not been able to separate myself from other people again. This was told by David Chatelahay Paladin. Chatelahay, yes, it's a difficult name. And he wrote about this in a book that accompanied his art. He went on to be a great artist. And he learned so much by what he experienced, and that story has always stuck with me. What if he had never known the other possibility? He would have gone on his whole life thinking that, but he was presented with another possibility. The officer never spoke, so he never knew for sure, but he chose to believe that's really what the officer was doing. And what he stumbled upon was a great truth that we're going to talk about today. No one and nothing is against you. It is the absolute truth. You may not believe it now. You may have a lifetime of evidence to the contrary. But until you realize that the entire universe is for you, you may never experience your wholeness or your true worth. The purpose of this book is to awaken you to the truth that there is only one presence and one power at work in your life, and that this presence and power lives in you as the Spirit of God. For this reason, no one or nothing can be against you, and to realize this is to claim your divine inheritance as a beloved creation of God. So saith Gary Simmons in his fabulous book, The Eye of the Storm. How many of you have heard of this teaching or read this book? I see a few head nods over on the left side of the room. A handful of us are familiar with this. Joe's a little bit familiar with it. This is a key thing. There's actually a companion book that goes along with the youth program. And this is essentially our first two teachings put together. That God the good and the good that is within us, that's the truth. Like period, the end. Sometimes people do things that don't appear that way, but that doesn't negate the truth. It's like the clouds that don't negate the sun. It's still there. It's still the truth. It just gets covered up sometimes. And it looks like it's not fair, but no one and nothing is truly against us. And this is one of a few of my favorite books. This is one of those I take it to a desert island if I ever have to be sent off somewhere. This makes the list. No one and nothing is against me. And Gary goes on to say, no one is against you. You have no adversary in your life. There is nothing in the universe that is against your purpose. Any experience you have to the contrary is evidence that your mind is rooted in separation and illusion. If you resist what seems to resist you, you strengthen the hypnotism that keeps you in bondage. If we're finding an enemy, who's the one that's suffering? We are. How many people do you have running around in your mind that you might be mad at? And they may not even be giving you a thought. Who's suffering? I am. By a story that I'm making up, because most of the time we don't really know what someone's intentions are. And we don't always know what's going on with the person, do we? You know, they say if you really want to understand a person, walk a mile in their shoes. So until I've really been in your shoes and dealt with your day and known about your family and know what it's like to be in your body, I can't really understand where you're coming from. All I can do is project what I know about my experience onto you and then make that story true. And that's what our brains are designed to do, to fill in the blanks with our story. But really what we need to do is fill in the blanks with God's story. We need to fill in the blanks. The gap to be filled here is with compassion and understanding and wisdom. It doesn't mean that we're doorknobs. We're doorknobs. We're not doorknobs. And we're not doormats. There we go. Doesn't mean that we're doormats. Anything goes. But it means that we can look beyond and save the judgment for somebody else. Imagine being on a New York subway train as a man enters in with several children and they just run up and down, and they're making all sorts of noise. They're bumping into people. They're just being generally irritating. Can you feel yourself on this train? Ugh, someone do something about that. I want to sit here and read. But the kids were running up and down the train, crazy as could be, so finally a gentleman that was on the train decided he would do something about it. So he went over to the father and he said, you know, excuse me, but your children are making a real ruckus here. Is there any possibility that you could do something about this? And the man looked up sort of from a stupor because he wasn't paying attention to the kids. And he said, oh, I am so sorry. We've just come from their mother's funeral. And I'm not sure how to deal with this day, and I guess they aren't either. Stephen Covey told that story. It happened to him on a New York subway one day. And how many times have I been that person sitting in a subway seat, sitting in a car, sitting in an office, thinking, I can't believe they're doing that. Oh, that's so irritating. Take a moment. Anybody have this in the last day or so even? And if you haven't, go back to last week or last month or the last family reunion. Got one? All right, there you go. So brave soul, Dave's got it. Yes. So take a moment and think about that person or that situation for a moment. And see, over the next few minutes as we talk, is there any possibility that there could be a different way to see it? That if you knew something bad had just happened to them, or if you knew that they didn't grow up with the ability to be able to handle conflict, that maybe that's why it's not going so well. This friend of mine from seminary had something go on this week we were talking about as I was working on my talk. So she gave me permission to share something that happened to her this week. She was at a family gathering and she was trying to explain where a certain building was in Kansas City, and one of her relatives was sure it was somewhere else. And they were talking about it, and then all of a sudden this relative exploded. you don't know what you're talking about. And there was this emotion, this, heightened. And she got really upset. And my friend was shocked. She didn't realize it had gotten to this level that, she thought they were just bantering and whoa. And so this person stormed off, and my friend went outside and kind of cried about it and tried to deal with it. And she shared with me that the hardest part of it was that she felt like part of her had just been ripped out. That this connection that she had been ripped out. And it was about the connection and the energy, not about where the building was. And that really can hit people. And that something had triggered something in this relative, and we can't know what that is. And she decided to just let that one be. Sometimes that's the best way to be, is just to let it go and let it heal on another level. Because she realized that they were in conflict, which is the storm. Whenever two systems come together, right, we have a storm of weather. Well, when two human systems come together, and sometimes they conflict, that's the storm. And at the center of the weather condition is a calm, peaceful center. And the center of the storm is also true when we come into conflict with others. And the four winds are conditions that support the storm, that cause, think about this story of my friend, separation, misperception, competition, and defensiveness. If any of those four come up, you've got a storm. So you're misperceiving, you're making up a story about what something means, or you're seeing it differently. You feel separate from that person, because when you're connected, we're still able to work through. So you feel separate. Or you're in a competition. I've got to win. Or you're defensive. I have a position. I'm right. I know where the buildings are. I'm the one who's the map maker here. So you're defending that ego position. When any of those come up, you are in the storm. And that is where your power lies, in being able to see it differently. At the I, there is peace, calm, serenity, clarity, and stillness. The storm of conflict also possesses a center, and we call that the eye of the storm. Not the eye of the storm is your wholeness and your spiritual essence. If there is a storm in your life, you can know that you and your wholeness are at the center of it. Knowing this, you can stop resisting making those people wrong who seem to be against you. Instead, you can shift your attention and your awareness, and you can experience the conflict from the center, where you are capable of authentic and principled action. You shift out. Our goal then is to shift out of being swirling in the conflict with the other person, and to come back to the calm center that we just found in meditation. We can find that again within us. There was a time when I was in seminary, I was on the student association. Even the big kids get to have a student council. It's called the Unity Institute Student Association, LISA. It was one of the most conflict-ridden organizations I have ever been in. Just get 50 leaders together and see who's going to follow. Nobody wanted to follow. Everybody wanted to be a leader. But it was the best learning of all, because you learned about where you're pushing, where your buttons were, and that, hopefully before you got out into seminary. And then you never had another problem in your whole entire life. Are you buying it? No. But you did at least work on some things. And there was a day that we had a meeting, and of course, I can't tell you what the details were, because it's not about the details. Whatever they were, I've forgotten. But what I know is she was against me. Oh yeah, the president. She had done something, I'm sure it was important. Whatever she had done, it was not what I wanted, and I was against her, and she was against me. I had a position to, you name it, right? I was in it, and this is in a spiritual organization. Yes. And, and so I remember getting really upset. And later on, what I realized was, oh great, she reminded me of my mother. There you go. 9 times out of 10, it's a family thing. Oh, my uncle used to do that to me, or my first boss used to do that to me. So I felt like I hadn't been heard. What was really going on is I felt separate from her. Not that it was about this detail. And this one really hurt. I mean, it really stuck deep into me. And it was a few years later before we were able to resolve it. And so we'd both been in ministry a few years, and we saw each other at convention, and we ended up sitting next to each other at a banquet. Oh, great! Sitting in the last seat that was empty, right? And there she is, my nemesis. And we both ended up finally talking at the end. I'm sure she started it. And she said, I don't know what happened, but I just want to put it all behind us. And I have goosebumps just telling you. And I was like, me too. I don't even know. And we get a big hug. And now she's one of the people I look forward the most to seeing at convention, because she represents how far I've come. That I no longer have to be mad at her for whatever it was. And we were able to talk it out and forgive each other for whatever it was. And that's what we're called to do. Gary Simmons says in his book that we are called to be peacemakers. That somehow, some way, those of us in this room, we have chosen a higher path. Not one of judgment and I'm going to put you in a corner, but one that says I'm going to try to understand this better. I'm going to seek first to understand in Stephen Covey language. And so he tells us that is our job. At the very edge of conflict, we discover what we're really made of. Our doubts and insecurities reveal themselves, not as weaknesses, but as areas of potentiality. That's what I saw that day with that argument, was not to judge myself as a weakness, but, oh good, here's another thing I can clean up. That I didn't know it was lurking there, but it was, and she was a gift to help that come out. Conflict leads to rebirth and transformation. It is only in the presence of challenging circumstances that we awaken to the possibilities of the moment. Darn it. It seems to be that conflict is usually the way that we grow the deepest. And boy, I tell you, that's absolutely what happened for me. And that's what we're here to do. To find a place, to find the eye of the storm for you. The next time someone at the office doesn't refill the paper clips. The next time somebody cuts you off in traffic. The next time you find yourself arguing with a family member, or your spouse didn't do the dishes like they said they would. Whatever it is, it's not that anyone is against. Everyone is doing the best they can from where they're coming from at that point, including you. So there's no judgment of, oh, I should have done that better. You did the best you could. And now, as a peacemaker, I can dig in and I can look at it with the scientist's mind and say, what could be different here for me? How could I find more peace? Because if you can find the peace, it will shift the things around you. So that's our job. Not to be right all the time, not to win all the time, but to find the place of peace and understanding for myself and for everyone around me. And when we do that, we will be living what Gary encourages us to do. He says, you are called to be a peacemaker, as a pathway to God and as a demonstration of your wholeness and your worth. The entire universe supports you in making peace wherever you are and in every storm that comes upon you. No one is against you. Make your pathway to God a demonstration of this truth. For blessed are you who have been called to make peace in a world that longs to know its wholeness and its worth. And so he says, Godspeed, peacemakers. Go forth. Make peace. Namaste. And as this is our time for our love offering, I invite everyone as you have been touched and felt the presence of God here, you're able to give back into our organization. And I'm looking for my little card. And I wanted to mention that at the first service, we had the family of Helen Kasluga with us. How many of you knew Helen? So a handful of you knew Helen. She was a member of this church for many years, and she passed last month. And so they brought us a lovely pancake. There's a little bit left, so those who get into the fellowship area first, you get a little pancake. And Helen's picture is there, so take a moment and hold the family in your prayers, as they go through this transition time. And it was just, everybody says that she was just a really dear person. So we're honored, even if we didn't know her, we're honoring Helen and her family today as we take in our love offering. So thank you for your gifts as you give into this community. We give with love and gentleness and kindness. And now we will say our blessing affirmation. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, God. And I invite you now, as we get ready for meditation, to gently close your eyes, if you prefer, or to hold a soft gaze. And to notice the body sitting in the chair, feet planted on the ground, sitting upright and relaxing. And then I notice the breath as it effortlessly comes and goes. I breathe in, I breathe out. And as I focus on that simple act, I'm able to turn away from the demands of the day, what it took to bring me here and what I'm thinking about that may be coming. And I trust that those things take care of themselves so that I can focus on the most important thing right now, being present. Present with all of the beauty that is. This beautiful music. The beautiful energy in this room. The magnificent body that supports me. Friends that are all around. When I stop and I take notice, I'm amazed at the abundance that is around. Even hearing the traffic on the road, people coming and going, lives being lived. There is such abundance. And in my little corner of the world is the abundance that I live. The blessings that I take part in. I appreciate all of that. In this place of love and openness, I am in touch with what is true and what is lasting. The inner peace of my soul. I am divine. I am whole. I am at peace. As I let go, I let this peace be everything in the silence. This is the peace of my soul, the true essence of me. Always here, with a simple turn of my attention, there it is, filling in every need, lifting me up. In this place, I now go forward. I share this blessing, this knowing of who I truly am with everyone around me, so that they can see the truth of them reflected back. We are all whole. We are all peacemakers. And so it is. Amen.